Parenting is the hardest job, and there is not a close second. Raising high-performing teen athletes or performers? That's a high-stakes job. I'm Nate Crandall, joined by fellow certified high-performance coach Steve Galley. We coach ambitious parents like you, and also your high-performing teens, because when you both level up, connection and results don't just improve, they multiply. Welcome to the Stop Parenting and Start Coaching podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest you don't want to miss.
Parents, you are in for a treat today. A good friend of Coach Crandall and myself is on today's program, Rob Geertsen. We sometimes call him Ricky G, but that's kind of an inside joke that we don't have time to explore right now. Rob has an incredibly interesting story that deals with high school athletics and his son and his family, and we're looking forward to diving into that in a few minutes. So welcome, Rob. It's good to have you on the show. We've actually wanted to do this for a while, so I'm glad we're finally making it happen.
I am really excited. I know we've talked about this for a while of having me on, and the day is here. I'm so excited, and thanks for having me on.
Nate, do you have anything to say to our friend Ricky G?
I have waited anxiously for this day. This is my most looked forward to guest. I just can't wait. So let's go.
So people that know Rob and know him well, we're here in Utah, and people that know him in the Utah high school coaching and athletic circles could talk for days about this guy. But for the people out there that know nothing about you, Rob, and need to know something about you so that they have some context to where we're going with the story, what do you want them to know about you?
Well, obviously, my name's Rob. Been married for 23 years to my wife, Natalie. We've got a blended family. So we have the his, hers, and ours, and 3 daughters and 1 boy, and then 7 grandchildren. And I've been in or around education for about 29 years now, coached basketball for 22. And then I also started and piloted sports psychology when I was at Jordan. And now I'm at Corner Canyon. And so I did sports psychology for 10 years. And really, I'm going to bring the perspective of the former coach, the dad, the sports psychology angle, and kind of different perspectives to everything we're going to talk about today. But that's pretty much me in a nutshell. And then, of course, I was Steve Galley's assistant coach at Riverton for part of that time where we had some great years. And so, yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Yeah, our teams went downhill after Rob left to become a head coach again, and we wish that he would have been back with us. But no, those were great years. So, Coach Crandall, why don't you introduce today's topic, because it's a sensitive, touchy one when you're talking about high school athletics.
Yes, sir. And we live in an age of NIL, and high school athletics hasn't come out unscathed on the transfer portal type side of those things. So Rob has had some great experiences, and like he said in his little self-intro there, he brings so much experience from so many different angles. I'm really excited to discuss this idea of high school students and transferring with you, because not only do you understand this from a school coaching side, administrative side, but you have some strong personal experience with this with your son. Do you want to give us just a brief background on your son and his situation?
Yeah, obviously that's the major thing is I'm going to talk about his decision to transfer when he was a senior. So when you're in high school and you obviously start your high school eligibility in 9th grade, he attended his high school for 3 years and then made the decision to transfer to a different high school out of city from where we live. And so it was a really unique transfer. In a nutshell, he were having some issues at the school he was at with the culture and with some of the things that were going on that affected him directly. And I mean, a lot of it was based on he's a pretty committed kid in his sport, and the commitment level didn't match kind of who he was. So that's one angle. And another angle, when I talk about, I'm a big culture guy. And so the program would preach culture, but not live it sometimes. And so that would get frustrating. And so there was a variety of factors, but ultimately, we're here to talk about what I would deem as a successful transfer. And I'm here to share with you kind of what went into that. And there is a lot that goes into a transfer that I think that the average parent maybe does not know, or maybe they're scared of. So I think there's some good things we can talk about today.
Yeah, I think people hear it and they're like, oh man, we want to do that. They don't understand the inner workings of it. What I love about your situation is you went into this with an actual problem to solve. What would you say is the number one thing you were trying to address as you had this conversation with your wife and with your son?
I think the number one thing was that his passion and commitment in baseball and absolute love for the game, that was the number one thing that we were really trying to support. And I mean, I can go back years upon years of all the time, and every kid does this. They pour their heart and soul into their sport. I think that a lot of the exterior influences that, I'm a big control the controllables guy, and control what you can control. And obviously that's sports psychology talk. And Zack actually had me as a sports psychology teacher. And Zack's my son, by the way. But I think that we started into the waters of getting outside of that, where things that were out of his control that were affecting his love for baseball. And we kind of hit a crossroads. It really kind of led up his junior year. And by the way, he was a starter. So this isn't a playing time episode whatsoever. I know you guys talk about that a lot in some of your other episodes, but he was a starter. He was very frustrated with just exterior influence, things that he had no control over. And as a dad and a sports psychology teacher, I would try to do my best to guide him through it and the ways to handle it. And we ultimately just got to a point where it was hard to do that. And as it went on, when I say the love for baseball, I mean, he was contemplating just stepping away from the game. And so that was really the triggers that steered us down a very deep path of, research and things that went into the actual transfer. But I think that we were just trying to uphold his love for baseball and support that. That was really the driving force behind our decision. And the decision did take a long time, and it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction by any stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rob, I want to dive more into the specifics of how you and Natalie and Zack were defining success. So I know you mentioned he was a starter. I can say this as an pretty unbiased person. Having watched him in high school before the transfer, he is a very good high school player. He's very skilled. Was this about winning? Was this about stats? How are you defining success, thinking of, okay, we're going to possibly go to another program, another school? What would success really look like at the new place?
I think that we were really looking at, I mean, I talked about culture before. There's so many layers and aspects of what that means. I think commitment is part of that. There was just so many things going on that he was surrounded by teammates that were not committed. I felt like the coaches, there was numerous examples of times where they would cancel practice inexplicably. They didn't really have off-season commitments. And these were all things that I actually went to the head coach. And a lot of people don't know that I went to the head coach 4 different times. And as a general human being and former coach, I am, as a general statement, I would actually say I oppose transfers. I'm a guy that believes that a kid should work out whatever their issues are. That being said, I'm going to also talk about a couple of other transfers just really quickly, but I do want to share two with you really, really quick. And one will be a huge name, but I coached a kid named Connor Pardo. And you hear Connor Pardo and nobody knows who that is. And this is when I was the head coach at Jordan. He was a junior, and he was really struggling with just the social aspects of the school, a little bit with his teammates. And there was just a lot of things going on that really weren't totally basketball related. And as a coach, sitting down and meeting with him and his dad, and I say we because I was part of that process, decided that it was in his best interest to transfer. And so a coach giving up a player is sometimes hard to do. And he was a talented player, was a starter in our program. And I don't even know if you guys know who Connor Pardo is, but he is the CEO of Pickleball PPA, Professional Pickleball Association. He is the CEO and founder of PPA.
Well, Rob, as a aspiring world champion senior pickleball player, I need to get to know Connor.
Yes. Well, and Connor, I was preparing for this to kind of talk about some of my experiences. I really believe that sometimes the kid needs to be in a better environment for who they are. And Connor was outgoing, but he sometimes would maybe rub people the wrong way. I loved Connor. As a coach, my job was always to be the best I could be to support a kid, and that's good and bad sometimes. But so Connor Pardo would be an example of a kid who I, as a coach, signed off, we'll say, because I believed it was going to be in his best interest to be in a different environment. And the success of where he is now kind of validates that. This one's a much higher profile name, is Jackson Dart. And a lot of people in Utah are familiar with Jackson Dart leaving Roy and coming to Corner Canyon, which is where I'm at now. And I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm the play-by-play announcer. We call it Charger TV, but I actually have been broadcasting Corner Canyon games for 10 years. So when Jackson Dart came in, he had a whole different set of reasons for his transfer. I think his were a little more athletic based. They were a little bit more, I need to be on a more visible stage, for who he was. But one of the things that people don't know about Jackson Dart is he came in and acclimated to his surroundings phenomenally. And as I talk about Zack, my own son, that's going to be part of what we talk about. But Jackson Dart's ability to come in and befriend people and not act like he was above anybody, his ability to mesh with the Corner Canyon community was unlike anything I've ever seen. And people never talk about that. But he would be another example of a transfer. And his is different because he plays a game on ESPN his senior year, has an unbelievable game, and the next day he's getting recruited by every school in the country. And obviously now he's an NFL starting quarterback. So there's two totally different transfer scenarios, because I know that we have a lot of parents that are going to listen to your show that are going to have their own scenarios of why they may or may not consider a transfer. So those are two really unique ones I wanted to share.
Oh, those are great stories, and it really is such an individual thing. What did you do to help Zack have a level of ownership in this? Because one of the things that we're big on in our podcast and what we talk about is involving the kids, making sure that they have a voice. How did you go about that with your wife and making sure that this was Zack's decision and helping him own it?
Well, there's a lot of layers to that question, and I'm going to start out kind of at the beginning. I have a pretty good pulse. I was heavily involved with everything he did, and I still am. I had a pretty good pulse for what was going on because I started paying attention, right? He would bring up issues and things. And so then I had a little bit of an advantage because I was the PA announcer for baseball. I was at everything. And so I started to notice some of the things and concerns that he had. And so I actually started the process without even talking to my wife. And that's going to be another, that
might be another
we're
episode.
laughing because we know what a risk that is. And what happened is I went to Zack and I just said, listen, he was coming home with concerns and finally reached a point where he was saying, look, I think I would rather just step aside from baseball than continue on doing what I'm doing. And so I asked him point blank, if I'm going to go and turn my world upside down for you over a transfer and look at what could potentially be a good scenario and good fit for you, are you committed to that process? And do you really want me to take this seriously and start doing that? And he said, yes. So it actually started while his season was still going, his junior year. And you guys will get a kick out of this. Steve, I don't even know if you know this, but Jay Applegate's another guy that we coached with at Riverton, and he was the baseball coach. I actually had a couple of conversations with Jay, and it was, hey, can I come and watch a practice and see what you guys do on a daily basis? And so I spent one day driving around the valley, and I mean, this will begin how incredibly committed I was to making sure we did this right. But I went to Mountain Ridge, Copper Hills, Harriman, Riverton, Alta, and Jordan's baseball practices in a 2-day stretch. And when I showed up to Riverton's, which was the first one I went to, I could see that some of the things that Zack was concerned about that were going on, that they were evident, because when I saw what other people were doing, and I wasn't trying to nitpick the program and every coach does things differently, but there was a disconnect. And after that 2-day stretch of watching, and nobody knew I was there. I just would show up and sit in the stands, and Jay Applegate knew I was there.
I would
That was
I
the
would have called
beginning of it.
security for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
if it
I mean, I'm sure there was the Mountain Ridge one was interesting because they had a young coaching staff, and to watch the energy and interaction that they had with their players was really a fun experience. And I saw that with Jay and Riverton, and I felt like the productivity that I saw when I started to look around was more matched who my son was. And I don't want to bash on where he left, but there was definitely some issues at the time that were maybe stunting his ability to be to his best. So that's how it started. Then the next step was I happened to be working up in Logan one day, and my family is from Logan. I'm from Logan. And
for reference, this is what, an hour and a half away?
yes, hour and a half north of where we live in
Okay.
Draper. And this was in Logan. Zack had played summer and fall baseball with Lone Peak because a lot of people don't know that either, that he was playing with Lone Peak in the off season because they had so much going on and he had a lot of friends. And so he was always staying committed and always involved in baseball, even when his high school wasn't. But anyways, Lone Peak was one that we had considered just because he had established friendships, but it also would have been a direct conflict with where he was at. And we really didn't want to ruffle feathers by like, hey, let's stay in the same region. And, because I knew inevitably that there was going to be some sour grapes people when he left that would be upset about it. And so we really wanted to minimize that to try to keep it so that it wasn't a distraction. And our focus was, let's find somewhere where Zack will be successful and be in an environment where he can thrive. So I drove to Tremont. Like I finished work in Logan. I drove to Tremont to Bear River High School to watch Green Canyon play at Bear River. And I had a couple of friends that saw me there because I'm from Cache Valley and some people know me up there and vice versa.
It's like
And they
Cheers.
were like,
Everyone
what
knows
in
your
the
name.
world? What are you doing at this baseball game? And it was pretty funny, but I was there scouting Green Canyon because there was several factors. One, I had family from Logan. Two, and he had 5 cousins that were already at Green Canyon. Two, they had Chinese in their school, and Zack was in the dual immersion program at his school. And three, I have pretty good connections at Utah State. And Natalie and I decided a long time ago that athletics was not going to define Zack. And so we were looking at other angles. Like if he's going to do a transfer, what other benefits can he get out of it that have nothing to do with athletics? Because if it's just a straight athletic, like Steve, you mentioned a minute ago, was he chasing a championship or was he, was it
Wins and
winning?
stats and
Yeah.
yes.
Like none of that had anything to do with our decision. Spoiler alert, he ended up going to Green Canyon. Green Canyon had never done anything in baseball in their school's history that would ever make you think we were chasing a championship. In fact, their Mountain Crest and Ridgeline up there would have been, if you're looking at it from athletics, those probably would have been your baseball choices. But we were looking at so many other things outside of his sport. But that gives you kind of a really good foundation of where we were at and what was going on.
So you talked about you started the process, and that included you buying a few bags of sunflower seeds and going on a tour of high school practices. What other due diligence things did you do? Because what I want parents to understand that the idea of transferring, this should not be a knee-jerk emotional decision.
Absolutely
And
not.
you think it's just a matter of turning in your uniform here, going over to the school and registering, and everything's going to be great. What were some of the other things that you did to make sure that you were going to get all the information you needed?
First of all, I'm going to agree with you 100%. And the majority of transfers, I believe, are knee-jerk reactions. I think it's important and a lot of it could be playing time based. I know we went through a stretch in Utah where bullying was this big trendy thing, but I don't know that bullying was really occurring. I think that was kind of a made up thing to get a transfer approved. But I think I would say that as I went to that Green Canyon game at Bear River, here's a very specific thing that concerned me. The third baseman was a sophomore, and I knew immediately that my son was probably better than he was. And obviously that has to play out in time. But I had a pretty good inkling that he was probably going to be a kid that could come in and compete for the third base spot. But that was actually a negative because I didn't want to displace a kid who grew up in their boundaries, who was part of their community, who was probably loved by his teammates. You have to look at every aspect of what is going on when you make a transfer. So that day that I left Tremont and drove home, that was the first time I confessed to my wife that I had been cheating on the process. No, I'm just kidding. I came home and I told my wife that I had gone to a game and I had watched the culture of the dugout and the coaches and the players. And I felt like we had a pretty solid fit if that's what Zack wanted to do. But I also shared with her my concern and deep concern over displacing kids that were there. That is the one thing that I think has to be looked at way more heavily than it is are you going to fit the culture of the program? Are you going to be displacing a group of friends that actually have grown up together? You have to look at that. And so I would say that was one thing that really scared me in the beginning as we started to get serious. I never at any point in time in this process talked to the Green Canyon coach. He didn't know who I was. We were just checking things out at that stage of the game. On the other side of it, after I had informed Natalie, my wife, and Natalie, she was kind of like, really? We're going to send him to Logan? I would say on day one, she was adamantly opposed. And then as she continued to kind of get to know Green Canyon and Logan better and even his situation, she warmed up to it. But as we were doing that, I also had reached out to Brigham Young and University of Utah and asked if he decides he wants to pursue his minor in Chinese as a high school senior, will you allow that? And both of them said no, you are not allowed. And it requires you going on college campus and taking advanced Chinese. So we already had no's in BYU and Utah. And so then I went to Utah State. They said no, but I had a connection at Utah State because that's where I graduated from. And long
You
story short,
graduated?
I graduated from Utah State. Go
I
Aggies.
did not know that about you. You're a college graduate.
After I shared with the language advisor at Utah State what we were trying to do, he actually said, I think we can make this work. Never, to my knowledge, and this has been verified by even like Steve Park, Steve's a retired educator.
Yeah.
Never before has a kid graduated with an actual minor. Like you get associate's degrees all the time because you're taking college credit classes. A minor is almost impossible for a high school kid to get because they have to be able to take specific courses on the topic in order to achieve that. Utah State agreed to do that. Green Canyon agreed to let him do tutoring credits while he was leaving to go to Utah State and attended campus. So he was a senior in high school going to Utah State and taking advanced Chinese with returned missionaries and people that were very advanced. And that was another huge turning point is when Utah State said yes. And now we knew we could make it something that was unique to Zack. And that also, Zack actually liked the idea of being a guy who actually accomplished something that nobody's ever done before.
That's an incredible opportunity. And what a great story and testament to his ownership of it and realizing this is an opportunity for me to pursue something that sets me apart, that can help me get ahead in life. And that's awesome. That's a great factor to go in there. So you decide you're going to make this move. What's the exit conversations like then? How do you
tough.
talk to current coach, future coach? What did that sound like?
Well, one final hurdle was the UHSAA. So at the time, they had 5 criteria that they would approve transfers. We didn't fit any of the 5. And so I had to spend a great deal of time compiling, I guess you would call it evidence that he was going to be able to accomplish this Chinese minor thing. And so they actually approved his transfer based on the academic benefit and this unique scenario. And he was dropping from a 6A school to a 4A school to move somewhere. There wasn't going to be any angst with people around the Salt Lake Valley because he was out of it. And so I think I really applaud the UHSA, and Steve will laugh at that because there's been many times where we have disagreed with the UHSA, but they really looked at the independent situation and they objectively said this is a true benefit to a student athlete, and they approved it. Now, had they not approved it, we probably would have had to go through the legal guardianship thing because that was the only way we were going to pull this off. And I was willing to do that. But so we got that passed. And then Nate, refresh my memory. I kind of strayed on that.
Just the conversations with the coach, like we're going to be going here.
Well, it was a little bit unique because Zack had never had an exit interview in any year he played. That was one of my concerns because I thought I'm a big communicator. You guys know that about me. That was a concern to me that I brought up his freshman year. And I actually went to the coach and said, are you going to have exit interviews with the players? And he said, no. And I said, well, I think it would be very valuable for my son to know kind of where he stands in the program and, the pros and cons and things because I do believe that feedback is important and vital for a student athlete to have their own coach talk to them about what they're doing right and what they need to work on. And all three, I mean, we've all been head coaches, and I believe all of us did exit interviews. And so that was really a huge, again, when I talked earlier about some of the exterior things that were going on, that was one of them. There was just the communication wasn't there. And I really had concerns about that. So because of that, and it never changed. So because of that, we really didn't exit interview him out, if that makes sense. We just did it. Now we'll flip it into the Green Canyon side. The first time I reached out, his name's Ryan Eborn. He was the head coach. Then he stepped aside. Now he's back. The first time I reached out to him, I just asked if Zack could come. And this was at the end of the school year. So we're now into the 1st of June. I just asked if Zack could come and be in the dugout with the team, not play in a game, and just observe his culture and what, because we were considering looking into that. And I remember him texting me going, is he any good? And I just kind of laughed because that's all relative, right? My response back to him was, I think you need to decide that for yourself. Like, it's as a parent, like, do I think he's good? Yes. Did I portray that to the coach? No. But I did say, you have to decide that for yourself. But I think that you'll like what you see. I think I was very vague with it that way. So anyways, coach agreed and said, hey, we play Monday night at 7:00 or whatever, 6, whatever it was. And so we had made the decision just to go up and let him be in the dugout and just kind of observe. And then the night before, the coach said, hey, our third baseman is getting his driver's license. So do you want to let Zack play? And I said, sure. I asked Zack, and Zack's like, sure, I would love to play. And of course, you're in the off season now, so it's a little different. Like you're more of a club team. And so he went up, and guys, no joke, he played the first inning of a game with these guys. They were the home team, so he was in the fields. He goes into the dugout at the end of the half inning, comes out to the fence where we were sitting, and he gives me a thumbs up. And he goes back in the dugout. And Natalie turns to me and goes, what's that all about? And I go, it took him 5 minutes to know that he's in the right place. He had not hit yet. That's all it took. Just warming up with the team and playing a half an inning and being in the dugout with the guys. And he was like, this is my place. So that was really cool. And then that would have been about the 1st of June. And so he ended up just playing summer with them. And then as he was playing summer with them, we were then going through the approval process. We wanted to make sure we did everything the right way. After I met the head coach, I made it very crystal clear to him that I did not want kids to be displaced. And to his credit, the transfer thing is a two-sided beast. It's the kid going and the knee-jerk side of it, but it's also the receiving coach going, oh my gosh, we have this transfer. Let's roll out the red carpet. And I said, I don't want the red carpet rolled out. I want you to make him earn everything. And to the coach's credit, Zack was the guy who moved. So it was all based on who pitched. And so he played third base when the third baseman pitched. He played first base when the first baseman pitched. He DH'd other games. And I tell you what, that was the best thing he could have ever done because it helped Zack blend and build friendships without resentment. And I thought the coach managed it phenomenally. And to this day, I can't thank him enough for the way he integrated Zack the right way. And it was the best thing we ever did to move our son into that environment.
I want to bring something up that with the whole Logan thing, and I'm pretending like I don't know this because I conversed with you and talked with you during this whole thing and when this was going on, so I know most of the story, but you definitely made this about Zach, and this was all for him, but and I know you're a very present dad. Like, you're at games, you would get up early because he wanted to get up early to go to the cage or whatever it is. You would do whatever he wanted or needed. And I know that you travel too. We didn't mention, but like during the times where you've been a part-time teacher, you've had another outside job that requires travel. So you will drive around, you will fly around. But Rob, are you kidding me? A baseball season of, I don't know, 25 games or whatever, and you're talking about driving a minimum of an hour and a half one way? I wanna know what that conversation was like with Natalie when you were just specifically talking about the travel, and we haven't even addressed the living accommodations for Zach. Like, how did that work? Because these are things that people have to think about if you're gonna do this.
It was insane. The driving, because I would drive up and back because I was teaching the next day or working the next day. And so, I mean, it's funny as I look back since he was a 2022 graduate and it's now 4 years later. And the number of times I've driven to Logan even since then is insane because he plays summer baseball up there with his collegiate team. So, but it was a little bit crazy. And the other part of it, Steve, is that we were driving two cars because that you just mentioned the living arrangements. You have to really look at that side of it too. For our son, he was very independent and very mature, at least we felt. And so
He
our
was.
level,
I can vouch for that. He was. Yes.
he lived by himself. And that's a whole nother crazy thing that we had a rental up there and we basically 60-day noticed our tenant and he took over the basement. And so my wife would go up and stay that you mentioned the driving. She would go up and stay with him during the week quite a bit. And then I was back and forthing quite a bit in the other car. It was an expensive spring for sure. And then we obviously were sacrificing the rent that we were getting from having a tenant in the basement. So it was thousands of dollars that if you really look at it in that respect, it was thousands of dollars to do this. And so a lot of people think, are you insane? And it was like, he's only going to get this once. And so when we saw what a good fit it was, we really went all in on supporting him. He ended up being this is another crazy thing. He was a sterling scholar in foreign language he was an academic all-stater, which he would have been regardless of where he stayed or went. And then the other thing is he ended up being the Cache Valley Player of the Year in the 1 year he was there and played for a fourth place team. So his team finished fourth in the league, and then they upset the 1 seed in the state tournament and went to St. George down to the college site, and he killed it down there. And so he ended up being a first team all-stater, took them the furthest they've ever gone. It was, that's when you talk about the successful side of it, the academic side of it was equally, I guess, like it had the same dividends as the athletic side of it. And so when the beginning you said, we know that he had a successful transfer, I would say that's an understatement.
Were there any other things that went on behind the scenes? Because the outcome sounds phenomenal on every aspect of it. Were there any other things behind the scenes besides the money issue, the traveling and things that were not pretty or challenging to deal with?
Well, for me, it was, because the school that he left is the school that I teach at. And people would argue that at our school, I'm probably the biggest sports fan of everything in the entire community. And it's backed up by what I do for the school.
Mhm.
So that really created some friction. And so I'm the one who took the friction on my end of it, but it was worth it because he was successful and he was happy. It's back to the Connor Pardo thing. Like sometimes a kid is not in the environment where they can be their best. And that's where I think parents have to make that decision. The other side of it is Natalie was like, well, what about his friends? Right. So she was looking at it like, well, he's leaving his friends. I had a little different attitude because I don't know about you guys, but am I still friends with my high school friends today? Not really. I mean, am I casually in touch with them on Facebook? Yes. But who am I really in touch with? Well, my college friends. And so I didn't feel like the friendship transfer was even relevant. Now, but I respected that Natalie did. And so we would have good conversations about it. I will tell you, fast forward 4 years, it was completely irrelevant. He left and kept touch with a couple of kids that he missed when he did leave. But today his friends are from Green Canyon.
Rob, did you have that conversation with Zack?
I did.
Like what
And
did
that
he
was a
say?
part of it.
What did
Like you want to know how to
friends?
Yeah, how do you feel about leaving your friends? So that was a definite conversation. He tended to be a little more like me, and he actually is a lot like me, but he tended to be more like me in that respect and didn't feel like there was any friendships that were like, oh my gosh, he's my best friend growing up. He didn't have anybody like that he was leaving. And so it wasn't that big of a deal, honestly. And I think Natalie would look back now and say, you're right. When he comes home, he's in Virginia now in school, but when he comes home for the summer, he has nothing to do with people from the school he left. He's always with people from the school he went to.
And yet that's something that you don't know for sure when you make the decision. It sounds like you made a pretty good educated guess on that, and you weren't just flipping a coin. But I would imagine for a lot of kids transferring, that factors in heavily to whether they're going to actually do it or not.
Yeah, I think the biggest fear, like a parent should always communicate with their kid. And I'm very in tune with Zack. I could tell you everything they did in practice today in Virginia, and I already know that right now in my head because we communicate every day. I know he has weightlifting tonight. Like, so that's the type of relationship I have with him. I know what's going on. All of his teammates in Virginia know who I am because when I am involved, you guys are laughing, but like,
It's funny because
I'll
it's
give you a
true.
great example at Green Canyon. Not only did he immerse in their culture, we did too. So I think that as parents, you also need to be prepared to buy in yourself with that decision. So I was the first one to ever run Instagram for their baseball. And when I ran it, I was promoting everybody when they had a good game. I was the one who took pictures and action pictures at every game. I was the one who did the end of your video. Natalie was like, hey, how can I help in concessions? But we really immersed ourselves into their culture. And I think that's something that when you're a transfer parent, you need to be prepared to be all in with your student athlete, because that's another aspect that I didn't really mention that I think was vitally important to making everything. I literally, and this is no joke, 30 seconds before Steve jumped on to do this, I got a text from a mother of a player from Green Canyon that said, happy birthday. We miss you guys. We built strong relationships with the people up there, but it's because we immersed in their culture and tried to support it and build it. And I think that's very important.
I think that's critical. I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up because I would guess, and it probably happened in this situation too, but and I love the way you use the word immerse. I love that word. I use it a lot. But you viewing yourself as we're the outsiders, we're coming in here. Did you sense that anyone was wary of you or Natalie or Zack? Here you are, you're the intruder, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. Yeah,
And
tell me about it.
I think in the early stages of it, you would feel that because the gaze of people upon, and look, a lot of it is all relative. It's you internally, how you're feeling.
Yeah.
But I felt like you could feel the gaze of who are these people? And it didn't take long for them to see that Zack was a talented baseball player. But I also think confusion comes with that, because then it's like, well, how's this going to affect my son? And how,
Sure.
and that was where you really could feel it. And I already said earlier that that was one of my biggest concerns. So what I tried to do, and Natalie was really good at this too, is we really tried to befriend the parents of the kids that Zack connected early with and then build from that. But I will tell you, there's one great example. There's a kid, he was the starting shortstop and he was a sophomore. And I have a great relationship with him. He's actually playing baseball at USU Eastern right now. And I was texting him last week, wishing him luck this year. And he and I have talked since, and he said he was really ticked off when we came because he thought as a sophomore it was going to negatively impact him, because he felt like at some point this is going to trickle over and they're going to kick the sophomore out. And we've had really good talks about it. But I said, what helped you to turn the corner with us? And he goes, well, it started with Zack, because he would always stay after and ask and invite me to hit with him and put in the extra work. And I always thought that was, he said this, I thought it was always really unique that a senior would take a sophomore under his wing. And then he said, I started to watch the way you were and how involved you were with him. And I respected that. And he said, and that was really the turning point. By the time we finished the year, all the kids loved everything I was doing, because I was the guy that was on social media. I created a Twitter for them as well, or X, whatever you want to call it. So I was running the Twitter and the Instagram, and they were getting the love on the other end of it. So yeah, it was easy for them to like what I was doing, because I was all about them. So that's a great question, Steve, though, because he definitely felt the negative vibe from the beginning.
Well, I have to say too, to the parents that are listening, this is a unique situation, and I think to treat all transfers as similar or the same is a big mistake, because there are so many things that are going into this, and I think you had an unfair advantage going into this. And this isn't to say that other parents don't have good perspective, but you had unique perspective as a coach and a dad. This is one reason why Nate and I do this podcast, is out of the decades of experience we've had, we've been on both sides, and you could see all of these things ahead of time. Like, you're looking down the road 100 and whatever miles, to Logan, and you were able to weigh this decision very, very carefully. Do you remember the day when you actually decided you were gonna do it? Do you remember the conversation between you 3, like, when you pulled the trigger?
Yeah, I mean, I think Natalie was a little bit in shock still, because she had really warmed up to it, but then it was reality, right? We're going to do
Right.
this. I think the reality of it came when we went and met with the counselor up there. His name's Grant Calverty, and he played football for Utah State, and he's a phenomenal guy. His son actually plays for Green Canyon right now and is being recruited to play football and baseball. But when we met with Grant, and they handed you that paperwork where you had to fill it out as though he was enrolling at the school, that was really the reality moment of everything. I actually, funny, before this, I pulled out the folder, because I'm a very meticulous record keeper of stuff.
Of course you are.
I pulled out the folder of his transfer, and it had like 150 pages of stuff in it. And I was going through and remembering, oh my gosh, we had to do this with Utah State, and we had to do There was so much that went into the behind the scenes that people never knew about. But that would have been the reality day, was the day that we met with his counselor, and his counselor was all in on making this work. And credit to the administration, because they had to allow Zack to leave campus every day to go to Utah State. And so they have what's called pack time, and it's built around their lunch. And so he just didn't have a fourth period, and he would use the pack time and lunch and the fourth period to leave for 2 hours. And then he would come right back. And Steve, and you know Zack more than Nate does, but he's on his own. He had every reason to be late, or he never missed class ever. And I mean, it's just like stuff like that. I don't know, he was so immersed in where he was and so happy he was there that he was responsible about it. The lady who lives upstairs in our house in the rental could not believe that this kid was a senior in high school, because he was not having parties. He was not You know what I mean? And so there was just so much positive that came out of it in his growth as a 17-year-old at that time. And now I look at him as a 21-year-old who's a senior in college. And he's at his college breaking all the records again that he holds, same records he holds at Green Canyon. And I don't know, I'm just really proud of that whole progress that he made and was mature about that decision. So that's another thing to take into account is, is your student athlete going to be able to handle the transfer? Because that's another side of things that we haven't even talked about.
Yeah. Rob, if you had to, if a parent came to you for some personal advice on it, what would your go, no go list be for them?
Well, this already happened. Ironically, we had a girls basketball player's parents, and it's a Riverton player, ironically. And as a junior, she was going through the same types of things. And, you know, I don't know that they were identical, but they were similar. And her dad actually called me one day and said, "Hey, we know you transferred your son. What were some of the things that you looked at when you did it?" And so we had 3 or 4 really deep conversations about it, and I really tried to help them make the decision that was in the best interest of their daughter. Her name's Hannah. And by the way, I'm really tight with Hannah and her parents even to this day. But they ended up transferring her back to Riverton. I didn't know at the time they lived in Riverton and had just come to Corner Canyon. But she ended up transferring back to Riverton and was their leading scorer and, had a phenomenal, very similar experience. But I think a lot of it was I coached the dad and the mom behind the scenes into like, make sure that she's willing to integrate and that you're willing to integrate the many of the same things that I shared with you about what I did and what Natalie did and what Zack did. Felt like it was very important that they understand you're the outsider coming in and it is your job to blend to them, not the other way around. And I think that's a huge important side that gets overlooked sometimes, that you don't come in and change the rules. You're the one who needs to come in and adapt to their culture and their environment.
What's the situation that would you suggest somebody stays where they're at?
I think the majority of cases, I think you should stay.
Okay.
I think it has to be an independent decision that you're willing to be committed to. I think if it's a playing time issue, see, this is where it's unique with us, is it was never about playing time. I think when you're dealing with playing time, a lot of transfers will go somewhere else and it ends up being the same thing all over again. I think you need to be realistic as a parent about how good your kid is. And so sometimes the playing time is a reflection of how good they are. And it's hard as a parent to look. I've already told you how passionate Zack was about his sport. Every parent's kids are the same way. Like they see them putting the hours in and whatever. And so as a parent, you become very invested in that because you know the work they put in. But at the same time, not everybody is, the best player. Like in basketball, there's 5 spots. And, that my dad used to always tell me when I was coaching, like, it doesn't matter what they are. They always want the thing above it. So if they're the 6th man, they want to start. If they're a starter, they want to be the leading scorer. Right. And it's just always one thing up. If they're the leading scorer, they want to be the all-stater. And so I think that I would encourage parents to take a really good view at how good their kid is. But more importantly, don't make athletics be the definer of who they are. That was probably the best thing we ever did, is to say, baseball's not going to define who Zack is. All these other elements are. And so if you can find a transfer reason that also benefits their character and who they're going to become as an adult, I would say then you would consider it. But if you're just upset about playing time or a coach or, whatever, I think you got to find ways to work through it.
I'm not going to mention names, but when I had quit coaching, there was a young man who transferred for his senior year, like Zack did, and transferred to a rival school. And had he stayed at the school and worked out his issues and battled through the challenges that he had, he was a starter his junior year. He was going to be a starter his senior year. He was going to play a lot. But he left to go to this other team, and he spent the whole season on the bench and on the outside of timeout huddles. And I know that's not what they pictured. I know that's not what they wanted. Without naming any names or schools or coaches, have you seen any disaster transfers that happen because boy, we're just mad at the coach, or we don't like this other player. We are not happy with playing time.
I see it all the time. I'm at a school where transfers are prevalent. And so I'm at Corner Canyon. Everybody wants to play football for Coach Kerr, who's now going to Weber State. But I see it all the time, and I'll see very talented players from other schools that come and they never see the field because I mean, the program has been phenomenal. There's never been a dynasty like what they've had in football, and there probably never will again. But like, I see people all the time, and I think they're more the ring chasers. And I think the positive side of going to Corner Canyon in football is your visibility is unlike anywhere else, right? And so I think it's that Jackson Dart was a blessing and a curse. He was a blessing because we got to enjoy him and see the success that he's built, and he did piggyback off of Corner Canyon a little bit, but he also did it himself. He had to be really good to be who he is. So I think I've seen the good, and then I've seen the equal side of the bad. And that is, we're talking about a Jackson Dart, but the curse of it is now every parent in the state is like, well, we want to do what Jackson Dart did. We want to go to Corner Canyon, and it will platoon him into a scholarship, and it will platoon him to this and that and the other. And that's not the way it works. It's not the way it works at all. And I also think if that's your motivation for a transfer, that you need to maybe take a real hard look in the mirror, because if you're chasing the ring or that type of mentality, then you are making the decision about the sport and not about, like I mentioned earlier, we looked at many other tangibles about who Zack is, and athletics was not going to be the definer in that decision.
I love it. And I'm going to encourage you to, when we're finished here, to text Jackson Dart and tell him that he is not only a blessing, but that he was a curse.
He already knows.
I've
I've already told him.
It's one of the things I love about
Yeah.
you. Shoot straight, man.
I do.
I absolutely love that.
I'm not going to lie to you. It is really cool to be able to pick up a phone and I can text or call NFL players. There's 3 of them right now that would respond to me instantly if I reached out. So
Wow.
that's been a thing that I've been spoiled with is, Zach Wilson was the first one, and he was a kid who went to Jordan to play for Coach Kerr and didn't fit in at Jordan, but he did it as a first entry ninth grade. A lot of people don't even know that Zach Wilson went to Jordan his freshman year, and it didn't fit because the culture at Jordan is different than what Zack was used to in terms of his classes and the types of people he was around. It's very different. And so even Zack Wilson was a guy who went somewhere and it was like, whoa, this isn't maybe for me. And then he came back to Corner Canyon and ended up being the number 2 pick in the NFL. But yeah, it is kind of fun to have guys like that where I can reach out to them. And then Jackson Powers Johnson, he's with the Raiders, Steve's team.
Hey, we got to get him back in the right position too this year.
He needs to be a center. Jackson Dart told me himself that he should be a center.
I sure hope that it's going to happen. Rob, I want to, before we wrap up here in a few minutes, give us a little update on your Zack, not Zack Wilson, but your Zack, and what has transpired over the past 4 years, what he's doing.
Well, interestingly enough, right out of high school, he ended up going to Big Bend Community College up in Washington and was right back in an environment that did not really bring out his best. And he started 46 games his freshman year. I think he hit 105. I'm not kidding. He hit 480 as a senior in high school. And now he goes to a college and hits 105. But he kept playing because the coaches loved him, and he was, he's their best defensive first baseman and whatever. He was in a terrible environment. And a lot of it was just in Washington, they have some things that are legal that, that it was just a party haven. And so he transferred. We went through it all over again. And then he ended up at Southern Virginia, a Division III academic-based school. So it probably shocks you to hear that he's at an academic-based school to match his athletic side.
Right. I'm assuming that he was teaching Chinese at the university while he was attending the university.
He's pretty funny because at Utah State, he actually was, because the missionary side of the Chinese, they don't know the language as well as he did. So they would teach him the tones of Chinese because they had just served missions, and Zach would teach them how to say aardvark, because missionaries would have a very distinct type of dialect and conversation. And so they would help Zach with his tone, and he would literally teach those guys how to say words that they didn't know how to say. So as you say, you laugh about that, but that's actually was a true thing. But he's at Southern Virginia, senior year. He's a two-way. He pitches and he hits. He's set all the school records on both sides, and he's going back for another year to see if he can bury the school records. But last year was a Division III All-American. And so he's had great success there, and they start this week. So I'm looking forward to flying out to Virginia an awful lot. And we talked about driving to Logan.
Right.
Now I'm flying to Virginia.
Yes.
And have been for several years.
Yes.
Yeah. So if this is kind of an obvious question, but if you had to do this all over again, would you do it all over again?
I absolutely would. The financial side of it was probably insane when it really played out, right? I think it's something that we didn't really realize the commitment that was going into having a kid living an hour and a half away that we're close with. So, but would I do it again in a New York second? It was the best decision we ever made. It worked out for him. I felt like we put the homework in to make sure it would work out for him. If you're a parent out there that's in a tough spot with your kid and you're having these conversations, I would first of all, I would welcome you reaching out to me to get more detail if you ever wanted to do that. But I would just make sure that you understand the commitment you're getting into, because it's not just about they're transferring to play their sport. There's 500 other elements that you have to consider and feel comfortable with as you make that transfer. And so would I do it again? Yes. But I also know that I put a tremendous amount of time into making sure that it was going to work.
Well, Rob, it has been an absolute joy to have you on here. There has been so much valuable information that you've shared. I think any parent listening to this is going to be a lot more informed about a really important decision. And I just want to go back to, this is the Stop Parenting, Start Coaching podcast. I love how you modeled that philosophy in involving your son in this decision and helping him develop a sense of ownership for his own life. And look at the benefits that came out of it. Just a tremendous job there. Quick parting shot, funny story you want to share. Just send us off on a high note because you brought so much joy to everybody today.
Me or Steve?
You.
Nate,
I hear Steve's story all
Nate,
the
that's
time.
That's a little dangerous to open the door there for
I know.
Ricky G.
This will be a good.
This is the teaser
one
for the follow-up episode.
Well, this will be. I'm going to actually flip gears completely and tell a funny story about you two.
Oh, okay.
This is a Las Vegas story, and it did not stay in Vegas. So we're heading down to the tournament. We would go down every year to the Mountain West and Pac-12 tournaments, and these guys, these two right here, they were letter of the law where your seat tells you to sit. You better go sit in it. And me and our other friend that would just go sit wherever we want and then get in trouble. But one of the games we looked up and these two had their heads bumping on the top of the, it was at T-Mobile Arena up there. We were looking up there like, what in the world are those guys doing? There's literally hundreds of, if not thousands of seats wide open around them. And they were sitting in their actual seats. So that tells you what type of character that you're dealing with these two. They are phenomenal men.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I think that's a pretty good visual. So, hey, if anybody did want to get in touch, what would be the best way for somebody to reach out?
You guys are welcome to share my phone number I don't know if you have the ability to do that, but I really don't care. I run a trivia question on our Charger TV and I put my phone number on it and my wife thinks I'm nuts, but I'm a trusting guy. But if you just went on, looked up Corner Canyon and searched me up that way, that'd be a good way. But I would welcome anybody who maybe has questions about how we did it or what we did beyond what I've already talked about. I would welcome any conversations with parents out there that are maybe confused or considering doing the same type of thing and maybe need a little direction or advice. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's been awesome to have you on here. Tons of wisdom. You can follow us, obviously, Stop Parenting, Start Coaching podcast. We are on YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, share it with all of your friends, because these are important decisions. And the more time you put into it and think about it, the better it's going to work out. If you do the homework, it tends to work out well. And Rob's given us some great information on that. Thanks for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Nate Crandall and Steve Galley would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you love what you're experiencing and learning from the Stop Parenting and Start Coaching podcast, please like, comment, and or leave a glowing review of this episode and the show. And to further help Nate and Steve expand their reach and impact thousands of parents, athletes, and performers, please share the show and subscribe to the Stop Parenting and Start Coaching podcast channel on YouTube. And if you want to explore further to see what Nate and Steve are creating to help parents of athletes and performers everywhere, please visit their website at createtransformbecome.com. That's createtransformbecome, all one word, .com. There you will find a growing number of tools and resources to help you elevate your parenting. Thanks again for tuning in. Now go create a magical relationship with your athlete or performer.